Okay, the next video for your ethical viewing pleasure is
going to be on natural law theory. And natural law theory is actually a very ancient theory. It can be traced all the way back to the time of the Stoics in the West, and perhaps even a version of it to Lao Tzu in the East. But the type of natural law theory we're going to talk about isn't the laws of nature. We're not talking about like gravity and entropy and conservation of energy, which is a description of how things are, but they can't tell us about how things ought to be. The type of natural law theory I'm going to discuss with you comes from Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. Aquinas combines divine command theory with human reason, and in his version of the natural law theory, just as he combined faith and reason in other of his writings. This becomes our first hybrid theory, in that we have a mix between human reason and divine understanding or divine commands. And basically how Thomas Aquinas saw this was, in the Middle Ages, it was the age of faith. It was the golden age of the Roman Catholic Church. They owned more property than anyone else in Europe. They controlled all education, all scholarship, and it was ruled by this idea of revelation or faith, where it came from God to the Pope, the head of the church, through the priesthood, through the Holy Spirit, through the scriptures. And Thomas Aquinas reasoned that if we are made in the image of God, and part of being made in the image of God is to have human reason, then it's not only through faith that we can know things, but we can also know things through reason. And so he combined these two different ways of knowing, faith and reason. And there was an overlap where faith and reason crossed over each other. And in this overlap area, this was called natural philosophy. Kind of like what we would talk about as science today. So certain things you can only know by faith. These would be things like the Trinity, the virgin birth, resurrection of the dead. You have to believe these sorts of things by faith. Reason would be things we can know through human understanding or observation. Things like 1 + 1 = 2. And then other things where faith and reason overlap would be, we're told by revelation that God exists and that the worlds were made by him. But Thomas Aquinas believed we can also use human reason to demonstrate or prove the existence of God. And whether or not that's the case is the topic for another discussion, maybe even another class. But that's what he's doing here. He's taking faith and reason and he's putting them together into this hybrid ethical theory. Now there's certain presuppositions that Thomas Aquinas has. First is that God exists. Secondly, humans are made in the image of God. It's part of what it means to be made in God's image. And reason can help us discover certain types of truths apart from or confirming God's revealed truths. Now there's different types of law in Thomas Aquinas' system. The first is divine law. This comes from God. It's the height, and out of the divine law comes universal law. From universal law we derive natural laws, and then from natural laws we derive human laws. And human laws are more specific applications of the natural laws that Thomas Aquinas believes we can perceive through human reason by observing the universal laws of God. These are broken down into 4 rights and 2 qualifiers. And the rights that Thomas Aquinas is talking about, they're not only rights, things that belong to us as human beings. It's like our birthright as being made in the image of God. But these rights are also like duties. So it's not that just like a privilege we enjoy, but it's also a responsibility that we bear. The first right that humans have is the right to self-preservation. You have the right to preserve your own life. I think most people would agree with that. this right to preserve your own life. Even animals have this sort of right, this drive or urge of self-preservation that seems to be involved in all sentient beings. Secondly, humans have the right to procreation. So no one is allowed to take that right of procreation from you, just as they're not allowed to take the right of self-preservation from you. Thirdly, you have the right of education. Now this doesn't mean you have the right to a free state education or you get to go off to private boarding school or something like that, but it means as a human being you have the right to learn. You have the right to grow, to be curious, to expand your knowledge, and people are not allowed to keep you in a place where you're stunted and stagnated and you cannot grow and learn new things about yourself or the world around you. Fourthly, humans are social animals and they have the right to socialization. That means people are not allowed to bar you from interacting from others. They're not allowed to lock you away or isolate you or keep you separate from other human beings. So these are the four rights. There is no hierarchy of rights. The right to socialization is equal to the right of self-preservation. There's two qualifiers that also go with the four rights, and the natural law theory does not work without these qualifiers, so these are very important. The first is very straightforward and simple. It's called forfeiture, and forfeiture is just like it sounds. It means if you attempt to take away someone else's right, you forfeit your own equivalent right. For example, if I poke you in the eye and you lose the right to see, well, or you lose the ability to see, well, I would forfeit my own eye. If someone attempts to take my life, even if they're not successful, if they're implying they're trying to do me bodily harm or to end my existence, they forfeit their own right to self-preservation or self-existence, and I can defend myself with lethal force. Now, it's important to remember that the forfeiture has to be equal to what right is being violated. For example, if someone is sexually assaulted or raped, it is not appropriate for you to kill them because they did not kill another person. What would be appropriate, though, is for them to have the same sort of assault on their own person, or say the assault resulted in a person's inability to have children in the future. Well, that person who did the sexual assault would lose their ability to have children in the future. Perhaps the attack made it so the person who was violated was no longer able to socialize. They were afraid to go out at night. They weren't comfortable being out amongst other people. They were full of fear and anxiety. Well, then the person who did that assault also gets to lose their privilege of socializing, and they get to be locked away in a place where they're not going to go out and cause someone fear or anxiety anymore. And so it's a very just theory. It's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, blow for blow, stripe for stripe, life for life. The second qualifier is a little more complicated, and this is called double effect. And I'm going to read this to you slowly, so I might type it up later on. If in order to do good, an unintended evil is also accomplished, one may proceed if it is a serious enough situation. Okay, one more time. Double effect states, if in order to do good, an unintended evil is also accomplished, one may proceed if it is a serious enough situation. The key word in this is unintended. You can never intentionally do an evil in the hopes of accomplishing a good. We'll see later that that is like a utilitarian or a consequentialist idea of an ethical theory. This is not natural law theory. You can never intentionally do an evil in the hopes of accomplishing good in natural law theory. And so be careful of that.